I am Dave Bryant, and here at Third Thursdays we get requests, and we have had requests for performances at the interview for other people, but none more so than our guest here tonight, Mr. Jamaaladeen Tacuma. So I hope you prepared some remarks for him.
Well, Dave, you've been at this for a long time, and you're much appreciated by all of us, and we appreciate you. And just to see you just flowing in your moments of creativity, haven't seen you flowing in your moments of creativity, and what you're doing now is really spectacular, so thank you.
You know, when I interviewed Al McDowell, I told him, I said, because he knows me from way back then too, people may not know this, but I was like the, what would you say, the club mascot of the old Prime Time. You know, I'd come to the rehearsals and I'd be there for those marathon rehearsals and hang out and watch and ask questions. And you guys just took me in, answered questions. It was an invaluable education and just so much warmth. And it was like, there was no question about anything at all. The fact that I had the interest to be there was enough for you guys. And I can't tell you how much that meant to me then and now, and it's been my life, you know?
Yeah. So, I know what you mean. I think all of us who came through that school with Ornette, we all have because I think if we were any way different, he would not have taken us in. So we all shared a really similar method of thinking, of character, and a certain moral compass, I think, that allowed us all to flow through him. And I know exactly what you're saying.
So one time we were in Germany,
right?
And I'm hanging with the guy that's the driver that's going to take us to the venue,
right?
And he said, "Man, all you guys who work with Ornette," he says, "you're all such nice guys, and you show up on time, and it's like you're all together." And he says, "That's just amazing." And I said, "Well, I said, it starts at the top."
Right.
And I said, it's because Ornette is so well-mannered, so considerate, that none of us would dare pull anything out of respect for him.
Absolutely.
And the guy says, he says, "I think that's exactly right." He says, just last week, Miles Davis came through here and everybody was a jerk.
Well, it all starts at the top. It starts at the top. And, the thing about it is that, we flowed through those situations, seamlessly. And the rehearsals that we had sort of really showed that, that spiritually we were there because, as you know, those rehearsals were extremely long. We played a lot, but we also talked a lot. And that meant a lot to us.
And it was amazing because I've told this story before, but you guys would do like the same song over and over.
Yeah.
And after one time through, after 5 of them, you'd go, "Oh, then that was good. That was the one." And you'd all be in agreement about it. And at first I was sitting there thinking, that sounded like all the rest of them. I can't figure out why that was
better. Yeah.
But I mean, just sitting there hours and hours, I got to internalize it, over that time. And I got to go up in between when you guys would take a break, talk to all of you individually, ask questions. And I mean, what's really weird is back then, Ornette was in the phone book. That's how accessible he was.
Right.
And he was rehearsing a lot of hours of the day, and for a lot of that time, it was me and the band. It wasn't like he had a bunch of hangers on or anything like that. So it was just, I had the pool to myself. It was kind of crazy. I'd think, where's New York? Where's the rest of the world?
Right.
It's them and me.
He was always accessible to other folks as well. I mean, of course, he would love for you to come past, the loft, and he would actually capture you and impart this information to you and want to play with you and create with you and, of course, have conversation with you. Yeah.
One time I had set up, because, it was hard to set up an appointment with him. I want to see you at such and such a time. But since I'd be traveling from Boston, I had to do the best I could.
Yeah.
So I would be like, I'm going to be Wednesday at 3 o'clock, say, or something like that.
So you would come all the way from Boston?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd get on the bus or whatever it was.
Right.
And so one time I'd set this thing up with him, and you never knew if he was going to be there. He might show up in a couple hours or whatever, but it was fine. So I got there one time, though, I knock on the door. And the door kind of opens real slow, like, creak. Like one eye comes out like this, and he goes, "Oh, David, thank goodness it's you." And he grabs me.
So it's almost like a cartoon.
I have no idea who he was afraid might be showing up. But it was like, you're all right, okay.
You're all right. Yeah. You know, it's a point in time. I mean, you know, when we look at these old downbeat magazines or these old books that you know, glorified the musicians that came before us, you know, that was a certain time. And for us, we're in our moment now, and it's that certain time. And I'm sure that folks will come later and check what we've done and check out what, you know, what we were all about at this particular time in our lives. And it's just an incredible time musically. Man, I wouldn't have it any other way. And for me, coming out of school, my first gig was with Charles Earland, because I had a scholarship to go to Berklee, and I chose not to go because I wanted to be on the road. And there was a group in Philadelphia called Catalyst, which comprised of keyboardist Eddie Green, bass player Tyrone Brown, who was my teacher, and a drummer named Sherman Ferguson, and the saxophone player named Odine Pope. They had the band called Catalyst, and actually the rhythm section was the backup band for Pat Martino at the time. So, you know, when I got out of high school, they suggested that I play with Charles Earland, the mighty burner. You know, so we went on the road for a year, and then I was fired in Newark, New Jersey. And I wanted to know why I was fired. He says, "Your timing is off." I said, "You got to be kidding! My timing is off. You know, we're playing every night. You know," and this was at the Key Club in Newark, New Jersey. That he called me back and said, "You know, my name was Rudy at the time. I'm not going to use you anymore." And I'm like, "Why?" And I had to know. I said, "Listen, if that's the case, you have to explain to me why, because in my life, I don't want to be thinking why I was fired." So he says, "Your timing is off." I said, "You got to be kidding me. My timing is off." He said, "Every night I'm playing with the drummer, we're killing it, you know." But I think what it was that I would come there with my white, you know, at the time they had these shoes called Earth shoes.
Oh, I had those.
You had those too, right?
You know it.
They normally came in black and brown. Of course, I had a pair of white Earth shoes. I had a gold guitar strap.
That may be the only point at which our fashions intersected, but yes, I had Earth shoes.
Yeah, so I had a gold guitar strap, white Earth shoes, and you know, when I would play my solos, the folks would go crazy, and he would be playing the organ, looking over at me. So, you know, now we're getting to this old school, you got to pay your dues, or maybe you're upshowing me, or whatever, I don't know. So, you know, I said, okay. So I thought that was the reason. I thought maybe that was the real reason. But that was okay, because I went back home to Philadelphia. I got a call from Reggie Lucas and James Ntume. They was with Miles Davis at the time. I had known Reggie but they were both from Philadelphia, and they suggested that there was a gentleman named Ornette Coleman who wanted me to come to New York. They were going to New York for two weeks, and he was looking for a bass player. And I said, okay, sure. So I go to the loft, walk through. Byrne was there. Michael Carvin was there. DiNardo was there. Michael Carvin was there. And DiNardo was, you know, quietly, stealthily walking around, you know, like he does, you know. So, you know, Ornette calls off the tune. Of course, you know, as we know, there was never one, two. It was never that. It was like, bam, right? So I'm playing, and I know that I'm jacking this thing up because, you know, I've never been, you know, involved with playing any of his music before. So I'm, you know, but he sees something. He sees some sincerity. He sees some emotion. He says, okay, I want you to go to Europe with me for the 2 weeks. So we go to Europe for 2 weeks, and it wound up being 6 months. So, and Rue sur le Prince, that was the name of the hotel that we stayed at the Hotel Le Prince. And that was where he wrote a lot of his compositions there, and we would stay there. We would go to Switzerland, to Italy, blah, 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 and come back there and rehearse, you know.
Right, so when you recorded Dancing in Your Head and Body Meta, so Were those sessions done, both those albums around the same time? Was that the same set of sessions?
I think we did those. We did those sessions in one day.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did those sessions in one day because he had a whole, treasure trove of compositions that we had rehearsed. So we just ran it all down, and that's how that happened.
So at some point, Michael Carvin left and Ronald Shannon Jackson.
Yeah. I don't know the politics of what happened, whatever, but he was there for the rehearsal, so that was good.
I don't know if on that record too, Ornette is overdub playing that drum on
Yeah,
Dancing in Your Head.
and no, because he was trying to explain to Ronald, and I could see it clearly as daylight. We were in the room and we had finished cutting our tracks, and he was trying to explain to Ronald this feeling that he had heard the drums playing. Not so much percussion, but just the way that the drums play. He said, okay, I want to show you. So he picked up the tambourine and the drum or whatever it was, and he just started playing it, overdubbed it, as well.
Was he talking about the musicians in Jujuka? Or?
Right. That track was included on that record as well. But I think in general, he was thinking of that,
Yeah. So he was still in the thrall of that
he was
experience.
still, he was still definitely buzzing off of that,
Because at the time, people were saying, man, Ornette's got two guitar players. He must be listening to, Pete Cozy and Reggie Lucas, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But he's also listening to the
Oh, yeah.
Jujukans.
He was definitely off into that, I don't think at that time other people were even, moving in that direction. He was already thinking about those kind of things.
Right. Before we get too far away from it, I want to double back one thing, and just while you were talking about Charles Earland,
Right.
Why Did I Get Fired? One thing that occurred to me was he's playing the full pedal board, right?
Yeah.
And I was wondering if was there some special.
Let me tell you,
this isn't harmolodic. This is just for my personal keyboard player curiosity, folks. So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, aside from the white earth shoes and the gold guitar strap, we're talking 70s. We're talking 1973, 1974. So you had this this jazz rock thing that was happening. You had Mahavishnu Orchestra. You had Herbie Hancock. You had Return to Forever and Passport out of Germany. You had all of these groups that were sort of, utilizing the guitar and utilizing bass guitar. So now we know that, and I think also the reason why he said the timing was off, I think because being an organ player, playing those bass parts on the pedal or the left hand, there's a certain connection with your human self with that.
Yeah.
So now he wants a bass player. I'm coming in and I'm flowing, and the groove is grooving, but it's it's breathing, and I think that also didn't but he wanted that, but he didn't really want it,
Yeah. Something there must be special considerations when you're used to doing that as the organist, and you bring in another bass
Right.
player.
Yeah. Especially when you're playing that bass line, it's one, it's all in. So now you have somebody you relieve yourself of that bass line, and you have somebody that's coming in playing. Now he had recorded records with bass players, but now we're talking playing every night, and it's like, I can't take it no more.
Right. This was not to be the only time you had to deal with another bass player happening simultaneously.
No, I had, but then there was, there was moments where we were breathing and we were playing, and we weren't thinking about, with Al and myself, we weren't thinking about, we weren't thinking about getting in each other's way. We were thinking about, if somebody was in this range, I would move into that range. If somebody was playing that melody, maybe I would try this arrangement together with that. Right. So we had it all worked out. And that was actually a great training for me to move into working with my bass quartet, which was, Basso Nouveau, which was 4 bass players and a drummer. Was Gerald Veasley on bass, Tyrone Brown on electric upright, Warren Ory on acoustic, and myself on 4-string and a drummer. So that allowed me to be able to understand how to work with those 4 bass players, because, having, with Ornette, having the 2 bass players, the 2 drummers, the 2 guitar players, you had to be able to listen, which brings you to your question that you wanted to discuss about modulation. You had to be able to listen. what somebody else was doing so that you wouldn't get in the way. And that melody that you played, or that improvised moment that you wanted to execute from that song, came from understanding what somebody else was doing and not getting in the way of that.
So I was thinking too, before the Steinberger, because at the time that was just such a revolutionary, bright sounding bass.
Yeah.
And I know there's an interview with Dewey Redman, I remember reading, like Downbeat or something, and he was talking about being at a mixing session with Ornette, and Ornette said something to the engineer like, take the treble off the top and put it on the bottom, or something like that.
That sounds like something
and
he would
so
say,
it's
right?
like he was looking for that kind of clarity.
Clarity, yeah.
Yeah, and which is really interesting. And I think also just psychologically, that thing of it automatically takes the bass out of that kind of support role, because you can't just by habit hear it the way you always hear it, right?
Right.
And I know that you also played the Rickenbacker before
Right.
that, right? And so I always think of that as being kind of one step in that direction.
Right, exactly. The thing about it was that the Rickenbacker, we all played like, if either in the 60s or 70s, you either played, and thanks to Monk Montgomery, being the first black man the first individual being a black man to play the Fender bass and record with the Fender bass, which was phenomenal to me after not knowing that for so many years. I was like, wow. So you think about all these bass players, but he was actually the first. So mainly the guys were playing Fender precision basses, or they were playing Fender jazz basses. Or they were playing Gibson basses. Then you had Vox bass that was happening. You had like all these other little instruments that were happening. But when the Rickenbacker came into flow, Chris Squire
Excuse me. Was the Vox, was that teardrop shape?
Teardrop shaped bass, yeah. A lot of cats from James Brown Band used that.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I think James Brown's band they were endorsed by Vox, so they would have like all these Vox amps on stage and the teardrop bass, whatever.
Well,
so,
you know me, I'm not going to interrupt you when you're talking about Chris Squire. So
right.
The first time we played together, I said, didn't you used to play a Rickenbacker? And you just looked at me and went, dunk, 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 dunk.
Yeah, of course. We grew up listening to Chicago, Peter, etc. He was playing Rickenbacker, and the thing about the Rickenbacker, it had a stereo input where you could run, you could have one amp on each side of the stage running a stereo sound. So it already had, the way that the pickups were constructed, you had somewhat of a more trebly sound, and you could dial it in where you can have sort of a treble and sort of a mid and bottom sound all at the same time.
Right.
So I think with Ornette, it was really important that you heard those notes clearly. And for me, being very interested in the groove factor, being able to groove and also think about melody at the same time,
right.
As you said, released me from that idea of the bass guitar being a complete supporting role, but also an instrument that was equal to any other instrument that was on the stage at the same time, or in the studio at the same time.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it. I remember one time Ornette passed out charts to us, and each part said on it, guitar lead, bass lead, piano lead, and he was like, I just want to make sure you think about this as though you're playing the lead.
Right, exactly, yeah. Because he himself never thought that he was a lead instrument. As you know, playing with him for so long as well, he always thought of himself as being inside the music. Never one that was just the idea of, being a leader, or, of course he was our leader, but he never thought about it himself as being in the front. He always thought of the saxophone being a sound that was within the sound that we were all creating at the same time.
Right. And it's funny because I understand when people say, Ornette says this about all the instruments being equal, but man, he's so great. He's obviously the first among equals, and obviously the way the band is set up, just the sonic character of his instrument is going to cut through.
Right, yeah.
And
also the way that, in commercial music that people think of the saxophone as being the lead instrument, or the guitar being the lead instrument, until cats like Stanley Clark and Alphonse Johnson and Victor and a lot of cats that were taking the bass, and myself for that matter, taking the bass, trying to look at it as being more of a lead instrument, you know, but also understanding the supporting role of it. Because my concept is, if, you know, we're not locked into styles, but if you think of a style, then you should be appropriately prepared to rock in that style. If you're doing R&B music, then there's this certain kind of, there's a certain thing that is expected of you based on the composition or the arrangement that is done in the R&B style that as a bass player you would do. And if you understand that, you could live in that world. If you understand being an improviser, you should understand that. You can live in that world. And so it all depends on which way you want to move in, you know.
Right, no, very good. The, that thing though of moving then to the Steinberger, how did that come about?
It was, you know, there's always this balance of the aesthetic as well as the sound. It always goes together. It's always, you know, like I know that you dig movies. I mean, you dig movies because the fact that when you're looking at something, you're seeing something that is adventurous to you, something that's pleasing to you, and the director was able to get that through, and it got through to you, and you enjoy that. For me, it was the same thing. And I think with Ornette, it was the same thing. I mean, of course, early on, everybody was, you know, playing their instruments. He chose to play the plastic saxophone. Well, he could have played, you know, the other instruments as well. He chose to play that, and I know him. So it was like, oh, I'm going to do my thing, and I'm going to not, you know, I have other saxophones, but this is a pretty cool little plastic thing here. Of course, you know, it was World War II, and it was the time and all of that, but you know, we know that that plastic saxophone had a certain vibe. It had a certain look. It had a certain character to it. And I think for me, being involved with design and style and fashion and music and all those things are the same to me. And I think that was the attraction that Ornette had to me as well. Being a young person, you know, having that kind of thing, I think he felt as though that it added to the complete aesthetic of the group as well.
Yeah. No, he was always trying to dress me up.
Yeah. He did good. So the Steinberger was, you know, just a natural step in the aesthetic. Of course, the sound was great too. With Ned Steinberger doing that, and the concept of the Steinberger having a travel ease to it, where you could travel with it with ease. The concept of it staying in tune, you know, without having the headstock, you know, the tuners, and that all was appealing to me. And of course, it looked great, you know.
So how did that enter the picture, though? Did you discover the instrument? Did Ned Steinberger approach?
Chip Stern.
Oh, okay.
The writer Chip Stern.
Yeah.
My buddy. He was writing for Downbeat. He was writing for Musician Magazine. He was writing for a lot of different magazines at the time, and he connected me with Hap Kuffner, who was the representative for Steinberger at the time, and basically, you know, went up to Newburgh, right, you know, Brooklyn, and saw the basses, and actually the bass that was given to me was one right off the table. It was right off the table, and this was, and Ned Steinberger was there. We met and we talked, and you know, I kind of noticed that people gravitated to that instrument, you know, in the '80s. They were, you know, but folks kind of like, you know, left it alone after a while. It was kind of a fad thing, you know, they left it alone, but I stuck with it. And I play other instruments as well, but that is, I would say, is signature.
Yeah, so you and Al and Chris Walker and Charlie and Blood, everybody had Steinberger.
Yeah. We just felt as though that it was an instrument that was aesthetically appropriate for the time, you know. And there's, since then, have been other instruments that have come out that, like even the instrument that Kenny plays, the Klein guitar, that's, you know, I think it's sort of revolutionary in its concept and its aesthetic design.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, it's a beautiful thing to be able to hear something beautifully and to see something beautifully as well.
Yeah, I know Ornette at the time was Bug and Kenny about the Steinberger.
Oh, yeah.
And so, yeah, I think he discovered the Klein and, found his soulmate there.
Yeah. That was good for him.
Yeah.
And he's playing this beautiful, Sunburst one, which I think is with the, pearl pickguard, I think is fabulous.
Yeah, no, very good. So, yeah, the other thing I wanted to ask you about, and this is when I was talking to Fred Williams, who played with Ornette and played with James Blood, and he was talking about when he went with Blood, that the way Blood would talk about the improvisatory part of the tune after you play the head, as the modulation.
Yeah, modulation, yeah.
And then he said when he started talking with Ornette about Ornette's approach, he said Ornette actually said, what Blood calls the modulations, I call harmolodic.
Okay.
So I asked him about it, and he said, well, you probably better ask Blood about that. So I did my best, folks.
I mean, it's really simple.
Yeah.
We thought of those modulations, in Ornette, in his terms, would be bridges. And these bridges were things that you would find commonly in a composition, but we would make our own bridges.
Right.
Everything that we did musically was based, as you know, on that composition. And the idea was in that composition, in that compositional improvisation that you did, that you played in all your playing, in all of your expression, that you played something equal, that you would continue to play something equal to that melody or better. If you did anything or sounded in any way less than what that melody was projecting, then, as he would say, you're just like, shoveling mud or, laying bricks, And
but that was the thing. He presents you with this masterpiece and says, you've got to top that.
You got to top that.
Yeah.
You got to top that. And of course, for me, being a bass player, I mean, it was brutal. It was brutal. It was brutal in a very good way in that, I'm coming from a situation where I'm, doom, ba-doo, doom, doom, ba-doom, ba-doom, coming from that to bang, right? So, me having to readjust my idea, thinking of the bass as being an instrument that is just as equal as him, having to play those melodies exactly like him, it wasn't no like it. You had to play those melodies perfect, And so that was a consistent learning for me and improvement. It was an improvement factor.
Yeah, Fred said that when, because it was something where he came in at the last minute, didn't have any rehearsals. He's the one primetime member that never had a rehearsal. So meets Ornette at the airport, but he said he had a lot of long talks with him while they were on the road on that tour.
Yeah.
And he said, Ornette says, all right, Freddie, I want you to be my trumpet player. Now you think about this very early on in the primetime thing.
Right.
And he said, I want you to stand up there next to me and play the melodies with me.
Right.
And he said, on the one hand, that was great. On the other hand, I had to learn all these melodies overnight.
Right. That's, yeah. And so in thinking about the modulation concept, those melodies were the most important thing that we had to do. And then you had to do, we made our own arrangements. We broke off from the melody, thinking about the arrangement, thinking about the certain things that you would want to do individually to make the composition what it was at the very end. So for me, a lot of those little bass lines, little riffs and things like that, they came about because I was thinking about what was going on in the disco era at that particular time. Yeah. So we would dance, it was an idea of grooving and also being able to play those melodies. And those modulations that happened were simply bridges that we were making various things happen. And sonically, that was exciting to hear that,
Right.
To hear something move in a direction that you was not expecting.
And he talked about taking little motivic ideas from the melody and actually making timekeeping patterns organically from the melody like that.
Right,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, Jamal is the master of the sequence." I thought that was cute. But, basically I was sort of trying to enhance what I heard him doing. And so, yeah, it might have developed into that. And I guess it was strange to hear that kind of sequential playing from the bass. And I like that, because when you're playing sort of music that's grooving, to be able to add that kind of sequential concept is beautiful. And you hear that in classical music all the time, you know?
Yeah, that sequential thing, that's almost, for him, the interval was such a primary unit. You
Yeah.
talk about thirds, fourths, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And when you play, take a phrase and take it through different keys like that, the cumulative effect is for you to just start to look at it as a pattern of intervals and not in a particular key, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like this whole thing
Yeah.
that happens, you don't really zoom in on it as a key. It's like multiple things that are happening at the same time.
And it frees you up harmonically, because as long as you're playing off of that phrase, it almost doesn't matter by that point what key you're in. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, I have this one tune called Dreamscape. It's like the tune is like boom, dun dun dun, do do dun dun dun, and then the melody is jabba dabba 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 da da da, jabba dabba da. And sometimes we'll get into a thing where I'll say, well, look, you got the melody, but if you want to go jabba dabba yabba dabba whoopie dabba, right? So sequentially it's happening, but not necessarily playing the same notes, but it's cool.
So when you were saying bridges, and I know maybe you were talking about connections between different things, but he always talked about, and this is funny because you don't think about his songs like this, but he was such a master of old school kind of stuff that people don't know.
Right.
But actually like classic, American songbook songwriting.
Right.
And he would talk about the bridges to songs and how important they were, and about the bridges to bebop tunes and how important they were. And he'd talk about, he'd refer to the bridges as the release.
The release, right,
yeah.
that's right.
Kind of old
Right,
school,
the release, right.
But it's such an
Release, right.
evocative word,
I haven't heard that word in a long. The release, right?
But that whole thing of the bridge is where you modulate.
That's where you modulate, right?
Yeah.
So it was like, so you base that, everything is based on that composition that we all knew that we did, and then that release or that modulation that happens, or a chorus or whatever, it happens. But you make your own bridges.
Right.
You're making your own bridge.
And of course, classically, a lot of times with that bridge, you go to the 4 chord.
Right. Well,
and so
we didn't necessarily go to the 4th.
No. I hear you. But a lot of those patterns were so it had that kind of 5-1 5-1 5-1 relationship like that. So yeah, so it's really interesting how he talked about he's crazy about Bud Powell.
Yeah.
Talk my ear off about Bud Powell.
Yeah.
And so there's this Bud Powell tune called John's Abbey that he was crazy about. And finally, I got the tune and checked it out, played it for him. But I transcribed it off the record, couldn't find a chart at the time on that. And there's this little section at these 2 phrases at the end of the bridge, and they're, it's a phrase and then it goes down, a step or so. But the 2 phrases end on the same 2 notes. And so, but it sounds like, even though they're the same 2 notes, it sounds like the pitch is moving, but it's not. And I went back to her and I said, Ornette, I transcribed John's Abbey, and the bridge. And he goes, yeah. And I said, those 2 notes, and then I said, but and he goes,
Right. He's already checked it.
And so I go through the whole thing about it's the same notes, but they go like that. And he goes, he patiently sits there and nods his head. And then he says, in harmolodics, every note works like that.
He used to, he would, like, sometimes we'd be sitting in rehearsal, and then he would start it just to, folks don't think that he knows about all of these other. Of course he did. He came through all of that, but at face value, they forget about him being in a certain era and then knowing about that other stuff. But I don't know if you remember a TV show with a host named Lawrence Welk.
Oh, I'm afraid I do.
So the way that those saxophones sounded like in the 40s, like that, right, like the bubbles in it. But he would sometimes sit and do that. And just like, and play like through all of that stuff and just start laughing. And then play it like with ease, any of those melodies that were like extremely brutal, he would just go, and we just started busting out laughing because I think for me, I said, I mean, I didn't know that you knew how to play like that, but you know, it was normal for him.
Or you've
know?
heard of when every once in a while he'd do like imitations of other alto
That's what
players.
that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
And so he'd do Johnny Hodges,
Right.
or he'd do the recently deceased. I'm sorry to say, David Sanborn.
Right,
He'd do something like that.
right.
And one time I remember when we did this TV shoot, and they did the thing where they flooded the set with smoke, as they do when they're getting the shot set up. And when they started doing it, he started playing "Smoke Gets Into Your Eyes" in full Johnny Hodges mode.
Yeah, beautiful.
Other thing I did was when he'd start in sound check, he'd start tuning up the violin.
Right.
And I'd start playing "Love and Bloom," Jack Benny.
Okay, right. Yeah, and back to that whole aesthetic, you talked about the Steinberger, and we talked about Kenny's guitar being a beautiful thing. Ornette himself was extremely beautiful in the way that he presented himself, the way that he carried himself. And of course, we talked about, him being a gentleman and him not wanting anything around him other than that. So I remember seeing, I just have visions of him. I don't know if you saw him at this moment, but I just have visions of him at the train stop in Europe somewhere with a beautiful fur coat on, with Gucci luggage, his saxophone in one hand, his trumpet in one hand, and the violin, like all of those three things, with a horseman's rider's hat. Yeah. So I mean, so that was a look that I'll never forget, and it was so elegant, so elegant,
Well, he said something to me one time, and I guess the upshot was when you're in a situation where society is telling you you can't do this, you can't do that, whatever it is, that he said, when I found out that I could recreate myself, he said, is when I knew I was onto something. But this thing of you can just endlessly be creative about your own appearance, about the way you use the English language,
right.
about the way you think about
the
everything.
Choice of foods,
Yeah.
It's a really beautiful thing. And I think that, like I said, it's a beautiful thing that we, the various concepts of prime time, all the guys that were in that particular group, and us that we were in our group, we actually made a we made a statement,
Right.
in terms of music history, actually. So that's something to be absolutely proud of, and something to be, and regardless of, the whole idea, because, we always talked about this concept of, being the best human being that you could be. And that has nothing to do with making money. It has nothing to do with you being an artist, but it has nothing to do with making money or being successful in a commercial way. Because we know that the gatekeepers are the ones that are really they are trying to keep things that are real, especially in our day and time. We're trying to come through with something that's real. And sometimes folks, they don't want that. And they'll try to put a stop to that. And of course, we know that he went through that, because he told us when he came to New York and was at the 5 spot, everybody was there, trying to see what all the the rave was about, And they came and they just did their thing, and we did we came and we did our thing.
No question that I think years later, you guys are so much more appreciated than you were even at the time.
Well, it's the same with you. That iteration of Prime Time was magnificent. And it was pushing it forward. It was constantly pushing it forward.
But that's what was so tragic about before we did the Lincoln Center reunion, that we lost Byrne right in the middle of rehearsals.
Right.
Because if ever anybody deserved to come out for that victory lap,
Right.
Oh.
But it's okay. But we continue on, on his behalf.
Yeah.
The lost, fallen soldiers. We continue on because I'm gonna tell you, folks who really know the real deal, they know that this, what we do is the real deal. Everybody that's, from Mark Rebo to my man Zorn to everybody. And then you got folks who, they try to act like they're not, but they trying to come around to this thing that we do, So it's a great thing.
Well,
And that's why, like Donardo, he's quietly, consistently, consistently doing his thing, pushing forward, trying to keep everything together, because, and it's important that we do also reach out to the younger folks, because the younger folks they are inquisitive as to what we're doing, what we've done and what we're doing, and to hear that, you can only imagine somebody putting on either one of our records and they're like, what is that? What the heck? And loving it. Like, I got to hear it again. I got to listen to it again. What is that? In light of all this kind of stuff that's happening,
Well, I'm really excited, thrilled to be performing with you this evening and having this CD come out that has been so long in development through the pandemic and everything else.
Right.
But it's great. But I remember when we first got the quartet with George Garzone and Chris Bowman together, and we were talking about it in 1989.
1989. Wow.
I remember this one experience. It was one of the, I'm sure you have no memory of it whatsoever, but it was just one of the peak experiences of my life. We had been joking around and playing, jamming some on Them Changes, Buddy Miles, at the rehearsal.
Sounds like something I would do.
Yeah. And so we played the weekend at this club. Last tune, the last night, and it's hot and heavy, we're hitting it.
Right.
And I'm thinking, it's the right key and everything else. I might drop Them Changes lick in here. And so I thought, well, all right, here it goes. And I started playing it, and as I was playing it, I realized the bass was playing it too. You had the exact same idea at the exact same minute. And I remember picking my head up, and I'm looking like this, and you're looking at me like, and I remember finally you went,
Beautiful.
And I thought, something just happened here. I'm not sure what it was. But I had kind of experiences like that with Ornette too, and I just always thought it was, you guys are so plugged in to wherever it comes from that they can't help but bleed together. You know what I mean?
Right.
The various strands. So I thought those are the moments to go forward and cherish. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dave, and congratulations on this concept of Third Thursdays, Bryant and Friends. I'm glad to be a part of this wonderful thing, and we're going to join forces because we're going to keep everything moving on. With the Outsiders Festival that we do in Philadelphia, we're going to join forces with you, and we're going to continue everything on. So thank you.
I'm speaking for the world when I say, love you, man.
Love you.